Have you ever wondered how one event can change the entire world? Imagine you were living in the year 1491 in America. Life is steady. Native populations have settled across North America, shaping their lives by the land around them. Their societies are unique, based on the environment they live in. Some groups focus on agriculture, while others rely on hunting, fishing, or trading to survive. Over time, these societies become more complex as they develop new ways to organize themselves. Some establish hierarchies, where leaders guide the community, while others create shared systems of power. Social structures like clans or tribes begin to form, connecting people through kinship and shared responsibility. For example, the Iroquois Confederacy in the Northeast forms a powerful political alliance between five tribes, while the Mississippian culture in the Southeast builds large cities with complex trade networks. Then something happens that shakes the world. Transatlantic voyages begin. People from Europe come across the ocean, making contact with Native Americans and bringing with them new ideas, goods, and unfortunately diseases. This exchange of plants, animals, and germs between the old and new worlds is called the Columbian Exchange. It changes everything on both sides of the Atlantic. New crops like potatoes and maize from the Americas go to Europe, while Europeans bring horses and wheat to the Americas. But it's not all good. Along with food, Europeans unintentionally spread diseases like smallpox, which has a devastating effect on native populations. Slavery emerges as a key part of the colonial economy in different regions. In the Caribbean, sugar plantations become the center of wealth, but they rely heavily on enslaved Africans working under brutal conditions. Sugar plantations were incredibly profitable because of the high demand for sugar in Europe, which had become a luxury item during this period. Sugar also had multiple uses. It was consumed directly and also used to produce rum, which became another high demand product. Rum was particularly popular because it could be produced cheaply from molasses, a byproduct of sugar production, and then sold at a high profit. The connection between sugar, molasses, and rum fueled a lucrative cycle where plantations could maximize profits from every part of the sugarcane. This economic model thrived on scale, and the larger the plantation, the greater the profits, which is why the Caribbean became such an economic powerhouse, despite the horrific human cost. The mortality rate for enslaved people in the Caribbean was shockingly high due to the harsh labor and diseases like yellow fever. In contrast, in North America, particularly in places like Virginia, slavery revolved around tobacco plantations. Although conditions were also harsh, life expectancy for enslaved people was slightly higher than in the Caribbean, leading to the growth of a self-sustaining slave population. Meanwhile, in South America, particularly in Brazil, the Portuguese established sugar and coffee plantations that demand continuous imports of enslaved Africans. The Atlantic slave trade was so vast that by the 17th century, over 12 million Africans had been forcibly transported to the Americas, creating a lasting impact on the cultures and economies of all regions. As Europeans settle more in the Americas, they bring with them new economic systems. The Spanish, in particular, developed the encomienda system, where native labor is used to support European colonies, often under harsh conditions. This exploitation reshapes entire societies. The growth of the Spanish Empire transforms the landscape with new cities, roads, and trade routes. But even the Spanish Empire faces struggles. Internal political struggles arise as colonial officials push back against Spain's central control. The Council of the Indies, in charge of overseeing the colonies, constantly battles with local elites over issues like taxation and control of resources. In areas like Potosi, which produced 60% of the world's silver during the 16th century, these tensions over taxation often led to conflicts, and occasionally, even rebellions broke out as colonists resisted the heavy-handed rule of viceroys. The wealth flowing from the Americas reshaped Europe's economy. In Spain, the massive influx of silver led to inflation, driving up prices across Europe. Known as the Price Revolution, this surge in wealth deepened inequality between the rich and the poor. While Spain's economy initially boomed, it also became dependent on silver, and as silver supplies dwindled, the empire began to decline. In England, wealth from the colonies helped build a powerful merchant class, and cities like London flourished as hubs of trade. Even countries like France and the Netherlands saw their economies grow as they engaged in the lucrative fur trade or established trading posts in the Caribbean. But wealth wasn't the only thing crossing the ocean. Religious conflict fueled many of the decisions European powers made in the Americas. The Protestant Reformation divided Europe into Catholic and Protestant nations, adding fuel to the competition for colonies. Spain and Portugal, both Catholic, viewed their colonial expansion as a mission to spread the Catholic faith. Meanwhile, England and the Netherlands, driven by Protestant ideals, sought to limit Catholic influence in the New World. In some colonies, like New England, religious freedom became a central principle, as groups like the Puritans fled religious persecution in England to establish their own communities based on Protestant beliefs. This clash of religious ideologies often translated into colonial policies and even military conflicts. Meanwhile, Native American societies faced their own challenges. For example, the Cherokee adopted aspects of European culture, including farming techniques and Christianity, in an effort to maintain autonomy and coexist with European settlers. In contrast, the Comanche adopted horses brought by the Spanish to expand their territory and become powerful on the Great Plains. Native groups, like the Powhatan Confederacy, initially tried to cooperate with settlers, but eventually engaged in conflicts like King Philip's War to resist encroachment. King Philip, a native leader, led an alliance of tribes in an effort to stop further expansion into their lands, resulting in one of the bloodiest wars in American colonial history. By comparison, the Iroquois Confederacy often played European powers against one another, forming strategic alliances with the English and Dutch to dominate the fur trade and strengthen their own political position. One of the deepest points of tension between Native Americans and Europeans was over land ownership. For many Native groups, land was a shared resource, meant to be used but not owned. Europeans, however, saw land as a commodity that could be bought, sold, and controlled. This difference in worldview led to constant clashes as European settlers expanded their territories, often at the expense of native lands. Women also played important roles in these societies. Native American women often held significant power, especially in agricultural societies where they were responsible for planting and harvesting crops. In the Iroquois Confederacy, for instance, women had the power to appoint leaders and played a crucial role in maintaining social order. African women brought to the Americas as slaves also made critical contributions. On plantations, enslaved women worked the fields alongside men and helped preserve African cultural traditions, from cooking techniques to spiritual practices. European women, particularly those in the colonies, often managed households, participated in trade, and in some cases owned land and businesses. Anne Hutchinson, for example, became a prominent figure in colonial America for her religious leadership and defiance of traditional gender roles. The European colonial powers had differing approaches to colonization. The Spanish focused on extracting resources, using the encomienda and mission systems to control land and labor, while the French concentrated on trade, particularly in furs, maintaining smaller settlements and closer ties with native tribes. The English, on the other hand, established large-scale agricultural settlements, relying on crops like tobacco and cotton to drive their economies. Tobacco exports from the Virginia colony alone reached 1.5 million pounds annually by the mid-1600s. The Dutch, meanwhile, emphasized commerce, establishing outposts like New Amsterdam, modern New York, and thriving sugar plantations in the Caribbean. The environment of the Americas also changed dramatically due to European colonization. European settlers cleared vast areas of land for plantations, leading to deforestation and the destruction of ecosystems. The introduction of European livestock, like pigs and cattle, caused overgrazing, which depleted the soil and led to erosion. Traditional native farming techniques, such as slash-and-burn agriculture, were replaced by European methods that exhausted the land. In areas like the Caribbean, where sugar plantations dominated, entire ecosystems were transformed, leading to long-term environmental damage. While the environment was being reshaped, migration continued among native populations. Many groups moved to new areas to avoid conflict or take advantage of new opportunities. Some formed alliance with Europeans, while others resisted fiercely. The Pueblo Revolt of 1680, for example, saw native people in the Southwest successfully drive the Spanish out for over a decade. In other regions, enslaved Africans joined forces with native groups to form maroon communities where they fought for their freedom and survival. These resistance efforts, while not always successful, showed the resilience of native and African populations in the face of European domination. Throughout this period, cultural exchange played a significant role in shaping the Americas. Europeans adopted native technologies like canoes and snowshoes, which helped them navigate the unfamiliar terrain, while Native Americans incorporated European goods like iron weapons, textiles, and guns into their societies. Trade goods such as sugar, rum, tobacco, and furs flowed between continents, reshaping economies and daily life on both sides of the Atlantic. Even language and religious practices blended in some places, as Native and European cultures interacted. For instance, many Native groups incorporated Christian symbols into their spiritual practices, while Europeans adopted Native words and names into their own languages. Today, the legacies of this cultural exchange are everywhere. Foods like potatoes, tomatoes, and maize, once native to the Americas, became staples of European diets, while European crops like wheat and sugar became integral to the diets of people in the Americas. Words from Native American languages, such as canoe, tobacco, and hammock, entered European languages and remain in use today. Religious practices also show the blending of cultures, with Christian and Native elements often coexisting in ceremonies and rituals in various parts of the Americas. In the end, these changes reshaped entire continents. What began as a simple idea crossing the ocean led to political, social, and cultural transformations that still echo today. The economic riches of the Americas fueled European empires, while the social upheaval caused by colonization reshaped the lives of millions, both in the New World and in Europe. The environmental damage, the exploitation of native peoples, and the establishment of the Atlantic slave trade laid the foundation for modern global inequalities. But the cultural exchanges, whether through trade, resistance, or adaptation, also shaped the modern world, from the foods we eat to the nations that dominate global politics. So when you think about the age of exploration, remember that every step across the ocean triggered ripple effects that changed not just who controlled what land, but how people lived, farmed, traded, and fought for generations to come. These ripples are still felt today in the way we view power, land, and the legacies of colonization.